Welcome back to Talk of the Town, and we are joined now by our news partner, Phil Anderson for U.S. Senate. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Ellen.
It's less than a week away until the election.
It is.
So today we're talking about voting. And first, I want to start off with, why should people vote?
Well, people need to have a voice, or should, I would think, want to have a voice in the affairs of their community. And unfortunately, government's got a very powerful effect on our lives, all aspects of our lives, social, economic, whatever they might be. So to have a voice in that, I think, is really important. You know, as libertarians, we want less voting, actually, which might sound a little different, but we prefer to have people making decisions about their own lives rather than having to submit to the democratic process. That's the best way to ensure the maximum amount of liberty and freedom. But insofar as things need to be governed, then people should go out and vote, so they've got a voice.
Why do you think people choose not to vote? I guess kind of going off of that.
Well, I think people don't realize how much effect government has on their lives, and they often feel that that their vote doesn't make much of a difference. So whether that means they don't see a difference between Republicans and Democrats, or they don't think that voting for anybody at all makes any difference whatsoever, they get a little bit apathetic because things don't seem to change. And that's something that I and other libertarians want to affect change with, and that is so that people see a difference in political philosophies and that they actually have a choice.
I think that's a theme I've heard in this election coming up here more than I have in the past. So I guess kind of expanding on that, do you think there is a wasted vote?
Well, that's I think that's a false narrative that's perpetrated by Republicans and Democrats to get you to disregard third parties. I think a wasted vote is if you cast your vote for somebody that you don't believe in or that you are just sort of surrendering to. I think it's better to say don't surrender your vote than don't waste your vote, because again, if people don't agree with what Republicans and Democrats are doing, and there's a lot of dissatisfaction with what's going on in Washington, just holding your nose and voting for another Republican or Democrat isn't going to affect any change. If they see people moving to voting for Gary Johnson or Jill Stein or myself or whoever, that's going to make things change in Washington, not just holding your nose and voting for the usual suspects.
So why should people vote for you this election?
Well, I'm the only candidate running for Senate who can really represent people in Wisconsin and the federal government. And the reason I say that is anybody who's a Democrat or a Republican who's been put forward to be elected for offices is already approved of by those parties, kind of by the nature of how it works, which means that they're already agreeing to put party before principle. Whereas I have the independence and the moral and political courage to say, this is wrong, we should do this, we shouldn't do that. And we've seen both of my opponents don't have the independence to do that because they're bound to their parties. That's a big difference. And I think it's important, even if you're not necessarily a libertarian, to actually be represented in Washington would be a relatively new thing, actually.
Now, you've been campaigning for the last year.
I have.
I kind of want to take a second to look back because,
a year.
Wow, I know you've been a busy guy, just getting to know you over this time.
Sure.
What would you say is the biggest lesson you've learned over this past year?
I think there's two, and they're sort of the same lesson. And number one is that people really do want to be represented, and they want hope for the future and not the same old politics. They're really tired of the negative politicking, which you've seen it get worse and worse and worse over the course of this cycle at both the presidential, Senate, congressional level. So they're really, really sick and tired of that. But they're still very hopeful for the message that they can have representation in Washington. So it's sort of like a hope versus despair. And I think the whole election hinges on whether people are willing to go out and vote for hope and change, although that's another candidate's motto from 8 years ago, real hope and change, and dissent from the Washington two-party paradigm, as opposed to just either holding their nose and voting Republican and Democrat, or just not voting at all.
I think you bring up an interesting point because that is a really big, I guess, concept or idea in this election, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
It will. I mean, especially with the presidential politics that are going on, there's all kinds of ways you can look at people that support Trump, people support Clinton, how that affects down ticket, whether they're voting on principle or just with party affiliations. It's going to be a very, very interesting election night. Obviously, I'll follow it very closely.
Absolutely.
But you know, and we'll be. If anyone's interested, we're going to be at Brokash down on the square election night, as well as representatives from the Gary Johnson campaign. So people should feel free to come down there and join us.
We've only got a couple seconds left. Any final thoughts before we go?
Well, I'd like to thank Channel 57 for supporting me in this.
Thank you.
It's been a fantastic relationship, and I hope it continues after the election. And I urge everyone to go vote. Again, your vote is your voice. Your voice is your vote. So go vote and don't get trapped into voting for somebody you don't like or don't support.
A fantastic message to end on. Awesome. Again, Phil Anderson for U.S. Senate, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
And we'll be back with more Talk of the Town right after this.